In a dusty garage on the edge of a small town, one man's quiet act of kindness ignites a journey neither he nor the world saw coming. Jack Reynolds, a humble mechanic known for fixing engines and lending a hand, spends his days in grease-stained coveralls and his nights in solitude. But everything changes the day he meets Claire Matthews, a mysterious new resident bound to a wheelchair and carrying the weight of a past she rarely shares. When Jack sees her struggling to get into her van, something stirs deep within him. Without fanfare, he crafts a custom wheelchair lift, built with grit, compassion, and late-night determination, and installs it as a gift. He never expects thanks, but what arrives instead is a private jet, a life-altering letter, and an invitation that will thrust him into a world of innovation, purpose, and global impact. This is not just a story about mechanics or machines. It's about how one simple gesture can ripple into millions of lives. From small-town garages to global stages, Jack and Claire embark on a mission to redefine mobility, and in doing so, discover that the power to lift others lies not in wealth or fame, but in the heart of one ordinary man. The smell of motor oil hung thick in the air, clinging to the old wooden beams like a memory that wouldn't fade. Sunlight streamed through the slatted windows of Reynolds Auto Repair, casting streaks of gold over the scattered tools, grease-streaked rags, and half-disassembled engines. It was a place frozen in time, not out of neglect, but because it worked, just like the man who ran it. Jack Reynolds was a fixture in this sleepy town nestled along the foothills, where everyone knew everyone and nothing much ever changed. In his early 50s, Jack had the build of a man who had spent decades lifting engines and bending steel, broad-shouldered hands permanently stained with oil, and eyes that hinted at stories he never told. He didn't say much, but when he spoke, people listened. And when he fixed your car, it ran like new, sometimes better. Every morning at 6 o'clock a.m. sharp, the metal shutter would clank open. Locals passed by just to wave or drop off a thermos of coffee. Kids knew they could get a free tire patch or a lesson in changing oil if they were curious enough to ask. Jack never turned anyone away. But even in this predictable routine, there was a sense of solitude that surrounded him. He never married, never left town, rarely closed the shop unless it was for a funeral or the county fair. His world was small, but his heart was wide. Still, few ever saw much past the rolled-up sleeves and welding goggles. On this particular morning, Jack was beneath an aging Chevy truck, legs sticking out like a mechanic's version of a welcome mat. He hummed a tune, something old, something bluesy, when the sound of a van sputtering into the lot drew his attention. It wasn't a local vehicle. It was sleek, matte silver, and clearly struggling. He wiped his hands on a rag, squinted at the windshield, and watched as the driver's side door opened slowly. Then he saw her. She moved with careful determination. A wheelchair emerged first, lowered by hand, with the practiced ease of someone used to doing things alone. Then she transferred from the driver's seat to the chair with a grace that belied the difficulty of the task. Jack watched silently, respectfully, until she approached. "Morning," she said, her voice smooth, precise. "Think you can take a look? The transmission's sticking." "Morning," Jack replied, stepping forward. "Let's have a listen." She introduced herself as Claire Matthews, moved into town just a week ago looking for peace and quiet to finish her latest book. "A novelist," she said. Jack nodded, pretending to know her work. She didn't seem to mind. While he examined the van, they made small talk. Weather, road conditions, town gossip, nothing too deep. But Jack noticed things. The calluses on her palms from pushing the wheels, the slight tremble in her arms when she hoisted herself up, the way her eyes scanned the garage, not in judgment but in calculation, as though cataloging every detail. She wasn't just strong, she was sharp. After a quick inspection, Jack gave his verdict. Not too bad, some cable tension, maybe the linkage is out of alignment. Give me a couple hours. Claire nodded. I've got time. She rolled herself over to the shade of an old oak tree outside and opened a laptop. Jack returned to his tools, but every so often he glanced her way. There was something about her, the contrast between visible vulnerability and internal steel. He'd seen people overcome tough breaks, but Claire wasn't surviving. She was thriving on her own terms. 2 hours later, the van was ready. Jack showed her what he fixed, careful to explain in plain language, not because she was a woman, but because he respected her right to understand. She appreciated that, paid in cash, left with a nod and a quiet, "Thank you." As the van rolled out of the lot, Jack turned back to the lift she'd used, frowning slightly. It looked clunky, manual, old tech. Watching her struggle to stow it stuck with him in a way he couldn't shake. Later that night, with the shutter closed and the town gone still, Jack stood alone in his garage. On the workbench lay a fresh piece of scrap metal, a blank sheet of graph paper, and a pencil worn down to its nub. He didn't know why, but he started sketching. The arrival of Claire Matthews had stirred a quiet curiosity in town, the kind usually reserved for unusual weather or a new diner menu. Newcomers were rare, especially ones who came with no family, no obvious ties, and an air of mystery that couldn't be shaken by neighborly casseroles or welcome baskets. Claire had purchased a modest cottage just off Lakeview Road, a quaint white house framed by towering birch trees and a sloping gravel driveway. She kept mostly to herself, venturing out only for groceries, library visits, and the occasional cup of tea at Millie's Cafe. Word traveled fast. She was a writer, she was disabled, and she didn't talk much about her past. Jack heard the murmurs like everyone else. He just didn't repeat them. What he did know, what he noticed, was how she moved through town with a quiet precision, always independent, always a few steps ahead of needing help. She had a sharp tongue when someone offered pity and a gracious nod when they offered respect. Over the next week, she became a ghost woven into the fabric of the town, visible but untouchable. Then one afternoon, she appeared at Jack's garage again. This time, it wasn't for repairs. "Hi, Jack," she said, her voice even and cool. "Mind if I bother you for a minute?" He looked up from a carburetor, nodding as he wiped his hands. "Sure, what's up?" Claire gestured toward the folding lift in the back of her van. "This thing's ancient. It rattles like a shopping cart and takes forever to deploy. You know anyone who could recommend something better?" Jack walked over, inspecting the lift more closely this time. It was functional but outdated. Manual crank, limited clearance, no safety lock. Definitely not ideal. He ran his fingers along the aluminum rail, quietly considering the design. "I'll look into it," he said simply. She offered a faint smile. "I appreciate that." What she didn't know, and what Jack couldn't explain, was that her request had already taken root in his mind. Ever since her first visit, he'd been sketching, researching, even ordering old hydraulic parts off online salvage forums. He didn't just want to fix her lift. He wanted to reinvent it. As Claire rolled away, Jack returned to his workbench. He flipped open his notebook to the latest design, a compact, remote-controlled lift system that could be installed without cutting into the van's frame. It was still rough. Some lines overlapped, others were erased and redrawn, but it had potential. For Jack, who had built engines from junkyard scraps, the challenge wasn't the mechanics. It was the why, and now he had it. The next few days passed in a blur of hammering, welding, and soldering. Jack worked deep into the nights, the garage glowing like a lighthouse on an otherwise dark and silent street. The design for the lift evolved daily. Simplified levers, stronger joints, a backup power source. He scavenged parts from old tractors, wheelchair ramps, even a hospital gurney that the clinic had thrown out. But even Jack couldn't foresee how quickly the moment of truth would arrive. It was a gray Thursday morning. Rain clouds hung low, spitting drizzle, turning the streets into silver rivers. Jack was halfway under a Ford pickup when he heard the sound again, that sputter, that familiar metallic groan. Claire's van. He stood and watched her maneuver into the lot. The lift groaned as she lowered herself to the ground, water dripping from her hood. As she reached the garage entrance, her hands slipped slightly on the wet wheels, and for the first time Jack saw her mask falter. She caught herself with a quiet curse. Jack stepped forward without a word and took the handles of the wheelchair gently. "Let me help." She hesitated, pride flickering in her eyes, but finally nodded. "Thanks." He wheeled her inside out of the rain and set a chair beside the heater for her to dry off. She shook the water from her sleeves like a cat and laughed softly. "I guess I'm not bulletproof." Jack poured 2 mugs of black coffee. "You don't have to be." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sound the ticking of the space heater and the occasional thunder rumble. Eventually Claire looked around the shop. "Do you ever get tired of this?" she asked. "The routine, the isolation." Jack shrugged. "It's quiet, it's mine." She studied him for a long moment. "Have you ever built anything just because you could?" He looked her straight in the eyes. "I'm working on something now." He didn't elaborate, she didn't ask, but in that moment something unspoken passed between them, an understanding, a spark. As the rain tapered off and Claire prepared to leave, Jack wheeled her back to the van and watched her struggle again with the lift. This time he memorized every clunky click and awkward bend of the system. Later that night he circled a part in his notebook and scrawled in the margin, "Make it easier, make it faster, make it hers." The project was no longer just an idea, it was a promise. Jack couldn't stop thinking about the way Claire struggled with that lift. It played in his mind like a looped video, each creak, each tug, each small pause in her rhythm. He saw the effort behind her independence, the moments she didn't let others see. And it did something to him, something beyond sympathy. It was empathy, pure and electric. He'd never known what it was like to live in a wheelchair, but he'd known struggle. He'd known what it felt like to be underestimated, to feel like the world wasn't built for you, that quiet determination he saw in Claire. It mirrored the fire he'd once carried when everyone told him he'd never make it as a self-taught mechanic. He remembered the early days, working double shifts at the gas station, sleeping in the garage, building his business bolt by bolt. No fancy degrees, no backers, just grit and grease and faith that he could figure it out. So now, when he saw Claire facing a world not built for her, it wasn't pity that moved him, it was purpose. That night, after dinner, Jack didn't go to bed. He returned to the garage, flipped on the old radio, and stood in front of his workbench like a man preparing for battle. Tools were laid out like weapons, diagrams littered the walls. He dug into his stash of salvaged parts. Hydraulic arms from a snowplow, linear actuators from an old hospital bed, a winch motor he'd rebuilt just for fun. Each piece told a story. Now they'd become part of hers. Hours slipped by. Jack didn't notice the time. He was inside the rhythm, the grind of gears, the soft hum of welding, the smell of burnt metal and coffee. His hands moved like they had minds of their own. Around 3 a.m., a storm rolled in. Rain pounded the roof, thunder cracked in the distance, and still he worked. If anything, the weather only heightened his focus. He wasn't just building a wheelchair lift. He was building dignity, freedom, a bridge between isolation and access. He didn't know what Claire would say, didn't care. This wasn't about applause, it was about what felt right. And that spark? It had become a fire. By the next morning, Jack's garage looked more like a mad scientist's lab than a repair shop. Blueprints were taped to the walls, each one more refined than the last. Coffee cups littered the counter. Parts were lined up in labeled trays. Test springs, failed pistons, backup battery box. He hadn't slept. He didn't need to. He was running on momentum. That morning, customers came and went as usual. Oil changes, brake jobs, a faulty starter motor. Jack worked with practiced ease, but his mind was always half on the lift. Every idle moment was spent scribbling on scraps of paper or checking measurements. At night he returned to full tilt, sanding down brackets, testing load-bearing arms, rigging circuits. The first prototype looked like a mechanical beast, jagged, overbuilt, slightly terrifying. But it worked. It moved. And it held weight, real weight. He used a 50-gallon drum filled with water as a test dummy. The lift raised it up smoothly, no strain, no sudden jerks. For a moment Jack stood back and smiled, a real smile, the kind that made the edges of his eyes crinkle. He hadn't felt this alive in years, but he wasn't done. Each success led to a dozen refinements. The lift needed to be compact, lightweight, and adaptable to different vehicle models. It had to run on both manual and electric controls in case of power loss. It had to be installed discreetly, with minimal drilling or custom fittings. Jack wasn't building a luxury product. He was building something anyone could afford and install. He didn't tell anyone what he was doing. Not his friends at the diner, not his cousin Frank, who ran the parts store, not even Claire, especially not Claire. He wasn't ready for her to see it half finished. If this was going to change her life, he wanted it to be perfect. Still, she came by now and then, oil check, tire rotation, nothing major. And each time she rolled in, Jack felt a strange flicker of nerves. Not romantic exactly, deeper, the kind of anticipation that builds when you're doing something meaningful for someone who doesn't expect it, someone who's earned it. One night as he tested the fourth prototype, a sleeker version with a pressure-dampened descent, Jack stepped back and imagined Claire using it. No more crank, no more struggle. Just one touch of a button and she'd glide down like anyone else. He closed his eyes, breathed in the metallic warmth of the garage, and whispered to himself, "Almost there." The sketches on the walls fluttered in the breeze from the floor fan. One of them, the original napkin drawing, had a coffee ring on the corner and a date scrawled in the margin, March 8th. Just 6 days since he started. It felt like a lifetime. Jack wasn't an engineer. He didn't have company. He didn't even have a website. But he had a mission now, one that felt bigger than bolts and blueprints. This wasn't about fixing vans anymore. It was about lifting people. And he wasn't going to stop until it was real. The lift came together faster than Jack expected. With each night spent in the garage, his vision became clearer, sharper, What began as a rough idea was transforming into a fully functional, road-ready solution. But it wasn't easy. One morning, while testing the new pressure sensors, the mechanism jammed halfway. The steel pins snapped under strain, and the entire platform tilted dangerously. Jack scrambled to shut it down before the motor blew. He stood there, breathing hard, staring at the failed lift like it had betrayed him. "Back to the drawing board," he muttered. The next few days tested every ounce of his patience. The design flaws piled up, wiring issues, battery drainage, misaligned arms. He ran out of welding rods, cracked a knuckle on the vise, and nearly set his sleeve on fire during a late-night soldering session. People began to notice his exhaustion. Millie at the cafe asked if he was sick. Frank offered to lend a hand, but Jack politely declined. He wanted to build this himself, not for pride, for purpose. On the 8th night, after fixing the tilt issue and replacing the control switch, the lift finally moved with seamless grace. Up, down, stop, soft, silent, smooth. Jack stared at it as if it were alive. This was it. All that was left was to install it. But he didn't want fanfare, no big reveal. He just wanted to do what he did best, quietly help and then fade into the background. So he waited for Claire's next maintenance visit. When she dropped off the van for a tune-up, Jack told her it might take a full day. She agreed without question and left with a smile. He waited until she was out of sight, then rolled up his sleeves and got to work. Jack treated the installation like a sacred ritual. Every bolt, every connection, every wire triple-checked. He mounted the lift inside Claire's van using custom brackets he'd forged himself. It fit perfectly, like it had been designed for that space all along. The control system was sleek and simple. One main button with a backup manual lever. The platform folded discreetly against the interior wall when not in use. It didn't just function, it belonged. By sunset, it was ready. Jack stood back, hands on hips, and gave a quiet nod. He cleaned every fingerprint off the metal, polished the housing, and laid a small folded note on the driver's seat. The note simply read, "Claire, I hope this makes your journey a little easier. No charge, just something I had to do. Jack." He closed the door, locked it, and parked the van out front. Then he shut off the lights and went home. The next morning he arrived at the garage early and pretended nothing was different. But inside, his nerves buzzed like live wires. Claire showed up just before noon. Her hair was wind-blown, her eyes alert. Jack watched through the window as she rolled up beside the van, then paused. She opened the door slowly, saw the new lift, the polished surface gleaming in the light. Her mouth parted, and for a moment she just sat there. Jack looked away, giving her privacy. 10 minutes passed, then the garage door opened. Claire entered without a word and stopped in front of him. Her eyes shimmered. In her hand she held the note. "You did this?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Jack gave a slight nod. She blinked, a small laugh breaking through her surprise. "Why?" He shrugged. "Seemed like someone should." Claire stepped forward and did something Jack never expected. She hugged him, tight, fierce, not out of gratitude alone, but out of understanding. "I've never had someone just do something like this for me," she said. Jack didn't know how to respond, so he didn't. He just gave her a small, kind smile and offered, "Let me know if anything needs adjusting." She smiled back, but didn't say more. She didn't have to. 2 days later, the letter arrived. It was in a cream-colored envelope, hand-delivered by a courier who seemed slightly confused about delivering something so official-looking to a mechanic's shop. Jack thanked him, puzzled, and brought it inside. The paper inside was thick, elegant, embossed with a gold crest he didn't recognize. He unfolded it carefully. Dear Jack, I don't have the words to fully explain what your lift meant to me. Not just the mechanics, but the heart behind it. In a world that often defines people by their limitations, you reminded me that there are still those who build bridges instead of barriers. I haven't been entirely honest with you. I'm more than just a writer. I lead a foundation focused on assistive technology and accessible design. I've spent years searching for minds like yours, authentic, inventive, compassionate. I'd like to show you something. A jet will be waiting at the regional airstrip on Friday morning. Come, no strings attached, just curiosity and coffee, and maybe the beginning of something much bigger. Claire. Jack sat back in his chair, stunned. He read it again, then a third time. Outside, the sun rose over the quiet town. Inside, Jack Reynolds, mechanic, tinkerer, solitary soul, held an invitation that could change everything. And for the first time in years, he wasn't sure what to do next. The airstrip on the edge of town wasn't much more than a stretch of cracked tarmac and a prefabricated hangar that looked like it might blow away in a strong wind. It hadn't seen much action in years, just the occasional crop duster or a rich weekend flyer with more money than sense. But this morning, it was different. The townspeople noticed it first, a sleek black jet with swept-back wings and silver accents gliding in like a ghost through the sky. It landed with barely a sound, coming to a stop just beyond the rusted windsock. Its engines whined down as the cabin door opened, revealing a sharply dressed pilot and a ramp rolling smoothly to the tarmac. Jack Reynolds stood at the edge of the fence, canvas duffel in hand, dressed in his best denim shirt and a clean pair of work boots. He didn't know what he expected, but it wasn't this. The pilot approached with a professional nod. "Mr. Reynolds?" Jack nodded slowly. "That's me." "I'm Captain Landon. Ms. Matthews asked me to bring you to her headquarters. She said you might need some convincing, so she asked me to give you this." The pilot handed Jack a sealed envelope. Jack turned it over, opened it, and read, silently, "I know this feels strange, but you gave me the gift of possibility. Let me return the favor. Trust your hands, Jack. They're meant for more. Claire." He exhaled slowly, then gave a small, resolute nod. "All right," he said. "Let's see what she's talking about." The interior of the jet was like stepping into another world. Sleek leather seats, touchscreens, polished wood panels. Jack felt like a bull in a china shop, his calloused fingers careful not to smudge anything. But once the engines roared and they took off, he relaxed into the hum of flight. Below, the patchwork of farmland and forests blurred into a ribbon of color. Ahead, destiny waited, unseen, undefined, but calling just the same. They landed just outside a coastal city Jack didn't recognize, at a private research campus nestled between rolling hills and glass buildings that shimmered in the sun. The facility looked like it belonged in a sci-fi movie. Solar panels, vertical gardens, automated shuttles gliding silently on magnetic tracks. Jack was met at the terminal by a young woman in a lab coat who introduced herself as Maya, Claire's lead engineer. "Welcome, Mr. Reynolds. Claire's been waiting." They walked together through a corridor lined with 3D models, photos, and digital displays. Every wall told a story. Assistive tech breakthroughs, global outreach, field deployments. Jack saw prosthetic limbs that responded to neural signals, exoskeletons for paraplegic athletes, smart homes controlled by eye movement. He whistled under his breath. I thought I was building something fancy. Maya smiled. Claire was blown away by your design. It was elegant, intuitive, and more than anything, empathetic. You understood the experience, not just the engineering. That's rare. She led him into a vast open lab where Claire waited by a prototype vehicle with a crowd of engineers gathered around. She wore a black blazer, sleek and simple. She looked different here, not just composed, but commanding. When she saw Jack, she smiled. Glad you came. Jack rubbed the back of his neck. Didn't have a lot of experience with jets before today. Claire laughed softly and wheeled over to him. Let me show you something. She guided him to a massive screen where a 3D rendering of his lift system rotated in perfect detail. Your design is already being reverse engineered by our team. We think it can scale. We're building a modular version that can be shipped globally. Jack's eyes widened. Wait, globally? Claire nodded. Africa, South Asia, rural U.S. You wouldn't believe how many people can't afford a basic wheelchair lift. But your design, we can produce it at a fraction of the cost of commercial models. Jack looked around the lab, the bright minds hunched over blueprints, the robotic arms assembling test models. It was like stepping into a dream he never dared imagine. Why me? He asked quietly. Claire's voice softened. Because you built something with love. Not for profit, not for fame. That's the kind of energy we need. Innovation with soul. She handed him a sleek tablet. We want you to join the foundation as our lead for grassroots development. No corporate suits, no boardroom jargon, just tools, a team, and freedom to create. Jack stared at the screen. Schematics, prototypes, global distribution maps, all built around his idea. I don't know the first thing about foundations, he muttered. You know how to solve real problems, Claire replied. We'll teach you the rest. Jack looked at his hands, still stained from grease and steel, then back in the future stretched out before him. For a moment he didn't say a word, then, where do I start? Claire's smile widened. Right here. They met that night in a glass-walled lounge above the research campus, the horizon glowing orange with the last light of day. Claire sat across from Jack, a coffee mug in her hand, the weight of unspoken truths hanging in the air. You ever wonder, she said quietly, why does someone end up in a chair like this? Jack glanced at her but didn't answer. He knew she wasn't asking for pity. Claire looked out the window. I was in Nepal, doing research for a novel. Flash flood wiped out a bridge. My team made it across. I didn't. She paused. 2 years in rehab, 20 surgeries, learned to walk again, then lost it. Wrote books in the hospital. At some point I realized the world didn't need another fiction novel. It needed access. Jack leaned forward. So you built this? I built back, she corrected. Every page I wrote became a design. Every rejection from a medical supplier became fuel. I sold my publishing rights, started the foundation, and used every cent to hire engineers who cared more about people than patents. Jack nodded slowly, now understanding the fire behind her calm exterior. That's why I knew you'd understand, she said. You didn't just fix something, you listened. There was a long silence. Jack looked at her and said, You didn't need a wheelchair lift. You needed someone to say, I see you. Claire smiled, and it wasn't sad. I was grateful. And with that, a bond formed, not just of shared experience, but of vision. The following week was a blur. Jack was given full access to the campus, a workshop bigger than his entire garage, a team of technicians, and digital tools he'd only seen in movies. At first, it overwhelmed him. He worked slower, cautiously, like a man in someone else's house, but soon the familiar rhythm returned. He found his footing in the chaos. He built, tested, failed, rebuilt. He taught the engineers how to adapt his designs to real-world problems, how to keep things simple, durable, affordable. Claire handled the strategy, the partnerships, the outreach. Jack became the hands. She remained the voice. Together they launched a pilot program to install 100 lift kits in underserved communities. Jack flew out with the first batch. Rural Texas, northern Kenya, inner city Detroit. He saw lives change. Parents who could take their kids to school. Workers who could finally hold a job. Elderly folks who hadn't left their homes in years. Each time someone used his lift for the first time, Jack felt the same thing. Quiet pride. The kind that didn't need a spotlight. Back at headquarters, Claire made it official. "We want to make you a partner," she said. "Co-founder, if you'll have it." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Never thought I'd have a title." She laughed. "You earned more than a title." He looked around the lab. The people, the purpose. "Then let's keep building." What started as a single device turned into a movement. The Lift project expanded into 30 countries. Jack's blue-collar approach fused with cutting-edge tech. Solar-powered lifts, voice-activated controls, open-source kits that rural communities could build from scratch. The foundation didn't just hand out technology, they taught people to maintain it. Jack insisted on community workshops, hands-on demos, and local fabrication. Claire raised funding through TED Talks, summits, and think tanks. Jack stayed in the field, his denim shirt becoming iconic, a symbol of practical genius. One day, while visiting a manufacturing site in India, Jack met a teenager who'd customized the lift design to carry groceries and water jugs. The boy had never left his village, but had improved on a design used worldwide. Jack clapped him on the back and grinned. "You're gonna take my job, kid." The boy smiled shyly. "Only if you teach me first." That night, Jack sat alone on a rooftop watching lanterns drift into the sky. For the first time, he saw the true reach of what he'd helped create. Not just machines, momentum. After nearly a year of travel, workshops, and whirlwind success, Jack returned home. He pulled into town in the same dusty truck, but people waved differently now, respectfully, gratefully. He was no longer just the town mechanic. He was Jack Reynolds, the man who made the world move. Still, he reopened the garage, not because he had to, because he wanted to. He fixed engines with the same care as before, taught local teens how to change their oil, hung a photo of the Lift project wall beside his old race trophies. One afternoon, Claire visited. She rolled into the garage like she belonged there, and in a way, she did. "Back to your roots?" she asked. Jack looked around. "They're still good roots." She grinned. "I missed this place." Jack handed her a wrench. "Help me with this carburetor?" She chuckled. "You really trust me with tools?" "Always have." And in that dusty old garage where it all began, they worked side by side, not as inventors and benefactors, but as partners, builders, and friends. 1 year to the day after Jack installed the lift in Claire's van, they stood on stage at a global tech conference. The crowd was electric. Thousands of innovators, students, investors. Claire introduced him as a man who didn't wait for permission to make a difference. Jack took the mic and scanned the crowd. "I was never looking to change the world," he began. "I was just trying to make someone's day a little easier." He held up the original notebook, the one with his earliest sketches, coffee stains and all. This is where it started, not in a lab, not in a think tank, in a garage, with a pencil." He paused, then added, "Innovation isn't about shiny tech. It's about seeing people, listening, and building the bridge between what is and what could be." The crowd rose in a standing ovation. As the lights dimmed, Jack and Claire stepped back, watching the world they'd helped build take flight. And though the world now saw Jack as a visionary, a hero, a builder of bridges, he remained at his core the same man. The one who saw someone struggle and decided to lift them up, not for glory, just because it was the right thing to do.